Welcome to Adventures in Infosec, where we explore the area of cybersecurity through leaders in the field. Today it is my pleasure to welcome JP Bourget. I've known JP since he was a founder, and he's now an EIR at Lytical Ventures. When I first met JP, he was a founding of a SOAR company, which he then sold, and since then he's been doing work along with being a CISO for a mid-sized company. So, without further ado, JP, how's it going?
Not bad. We're up here in Rochester, and we did not get 6 feet of snow, so we're doing good.
Well, as long as you can dig yourself out, you're in a good shape there. So, why don't we start with your
Right.
career in InfoSec? How did you get started in cybersecurity?
Yeah. I grew up in Buffalo. I moved to Rochester in my early 20s. I ended a restaurant career to go into computers, and so I went to community college. Then that led to RIT, or the Rochester Institute of Technology, and I got a bachelor's in IT. And then I ended up getting convinced, not convinced, but I got interested in cyber right around then. I went to my first DEF CON, my first ShmooCon, in 2005. So then I went on and got a master's in cybersecurity. Fast forward like a few years to maybe 2010, I was teaching as an adjunct in the evening, and I was functionally a CIO during the day at a manufacturing company based in Rochester, New York. And a couple years later, I got really into cycling, and I went to my boss. I said, "Hey, I want to take next summer off to ride a bicycle across the U.S." And he kind of like looked at me funny and said, "Well, I'll give you a couple weeks off, but like I can't give you the summer off." So I actually went to DEF CON that summer, and I met this guy called Mike Murray, who actually passed away a few months ago, but he was an awesome guy. I met Mike Murray at a company called Mad Security, and I started doing subcontracting work for them. And like my kid thinks this is really cool. My first job for them, I went to NASA to teach like a pen testing class in Alabama, and then that led to me uh, flying around the world for Mad, doing sub work for McAfee. Fixing SIM deployments and doing net new SIM deployments. And so I got to see lots of different environments, from like global fives to like random companies in California or Australia, a little bit of government work here and there. And as I was on that journey, now we're in 2013, I kind of noticed a problem. And so I did do the bike ride, by the way, in 2013, took 6 or 7 weeks off, and we rode from the East Coast to the West Coast, stopped at DEF CON, raised money for the EFF. It was a great time. It was actually almost 10 years ago.
Who's
It's
the we
crazy.
in that story?
But I noticed that, I'm sorry?
Who is the we in that story?
Oh, so it was Bruce Potter, who runs ShmooCon, and myself. And so and his wife Heidi come. So actually Heidi is, the other, she's the real operator behind ShmooCon. But Bruce and Heidi and their family went, and my dad came also, and so we had two follow cars. And we learned that the country's way bigger than you think it is. That's a story for another day. But I went to parts of the country I would have never gone to otherwise. Amazing hospitality in places you would not think, you know, and you learn how to live without cell phone service for a week and a half. Um,
So you
yeah, no, but it was an
finished
awesome ride.
biking,
It definitely was a
and
challenge.
you're doing security incident response management SIM deployments, and that's when you kind of start to
Yep.
get the idea to pivot into being a founder. So let's talk about that idea and the founder journey.
Well, yeah, that's where I was
Yep.
going. Yeah, and so as I was doing all these sim deployments, or sim, I'm trying not to, I won't swear, but like sim uh, repair, like going in and fixing things. I noticed that organizations or security teams didn't have the people, the process, the skill set, or the tools to really handle alerts or respond to incidents. And so I started working with a guy, Mike Pinch, who at the time was the CISO of the University of Rochester, and we tried to actually create like a case management or a ticketing system for the SOC, or for security operations, in a GRC product called RSAM. And we failed miserably. It was like just not built for the use case, et cetera, et cetera. So we had the bright idea to go start a company. Or I had the bright idea to go start a company. I didn't even realize I had a software company until like a year in, but that's a whole nother thing. But I was very naive. I didn't really know what I was doing. Um, but we basically went and built an MVP. I tried to raise money in upstate New York, which is um, not an easy place to raise for software, and so we ended up moving down to DC. and we got into Mach 37, and that's kind of when things started to take off. And so now we're in 2015. So we graduated Mach 37 in fall of 2014. Yeah, so Mach 37, it still exists, although in a different form. It was a cybersecurity product accelerator based out of Northern Virginia, run by a guy, Rick Gordon, and Bob Stratt, and then another guy, Dan Woolley. They all got together and built this model to essentially have I think it was a 13 or 14 week boot camp to launch founders, to help launch companies. And I have to say that, like, my master's degree, followed by my bike ride, followed by Mach 37, were like three key points in my career progression, um, of me kind of going to the next level. And the team that Rick and Strat and Dan put together, I got injected in this Boys and Girls Club of people who had built billion-dollar companies, who would, the founding secretary of DHS came and had dinner and told us his story. Like the amount of like um, support and perspective I was able to get from that really changed the game for me.
Excellent.
So yeah, so look, like, we hired I was the CEO and founder for 3 years. We hired another CEO, and I went back to being like an innovator, a geek, and one thing led to another, and we sold the swim lane in 2020, and then since then I've started a consulting company, which is uh, really based on helping security operations centers mature. We kind of go in and we do an assessment, and we try to meet them where they are. When I was doing the SOAR, when I was in the SOAR business, I got to see anywhere from like 300 to 400 security operations centers over the period of 4 or 5 years. And I also got a lot of hands-on work with all the security APIs that exist. And so I've got to see the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I've been able to kind of take that and um, bring, obviously, the better parts of that some of the top 10% of security teams are doing, out to my
And so
clients.
during that period, you ended up being an interim CISO for a bit. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, so it's really funny. So a buddy of mine, I'm not gonna use names here, but a buddy of mine called me up I guess it was about a year and 3 months ago. He called me up on Labor Day weekend. He's like, "Hey, can you help me with some Palo work at this client in Rochester? Like, we kind of had something had something happen, and one thing led to another, and the next day I ended up having like a 30-minute interview to like be the interim CISO there. And so I kind of went into an environment where the prior CISO had just like moved on to a new job, and they needed someone on the ground. And so I jumped into about a $250 million, $250 million um, private equity funded, or private equity owned business that was split between the U.S. and India, and had a lot of work to do when I went in there. And what some of the more interesting things is, and I know we'll talk about Microsoft and what they're doing in a few moments, but I was able to ignore risk as like a practice for most of my career, but I kind of got forced into it, and I have a very I have a lot of respect for the people that are trying to go in and manage risk at that from that perspective. Because I'm really like a blue team operator and a blue team strategy or advisory guy, and I had to go in and kind of play in the risk world, and I learned a lot about kind of how it works, how people are successful with it, and not only just in cyber, but like how risk plugs into like a larger enterprise risk management plan. And it's hard, and so especially when you have like a private equity business that isn't bleeding money. Um, it becomes very challenging to balance the goals of the shareholders with the goals of um, well, let's just say with like best practice in cyber or in the larger enterprise risk
So let
management
me
space.
double click on that for a second because you're talking about risk versus cybersecurity. Can you explain that to folks that think of cybersecurity just as a bunch of tools and practices to prevent hackers?
Well, I think that tools and practices to prevent hackers is just another way to describe risk. So if I'm trying to stop somebody from getting in my network, I would identify that as a risk that I could have a threat actor get control of my network. Um, the thing is that in cyber, like in information security, which I'm not prepared to really like precisely define the difference, but what one is kind of like everything data related. One is more like network and systems and all that. But in information security, risk is not just the Metasploit to all the different tools that one might use. Risk is like, hey, could a sprinkler system go off in a server room that causes the servers to break? It is do we have the right badge systems? Do we have the right fraud controls on our bank accounts to get notified when wires happen? Right. So it's not just like, hey, can somebody get past my firewall? It's any event that could disrupt or either disrupt or totally bring the business to a halt that would cause an impact to revenue, an impact to our public perception or the optics of how we run as a business, or like, from public relations perspective, or else, cause harm to employees internally or to any asset that we have. Does that
Yeah,
does that
no,
help?
where I was really leading is, there's ways of preventing hackers and there's ways of mitigating risk, and sometimes those two things are no, we're going to buy insurance, right? We'll accept that risk. The hacker might get in, but we're insured, so it's fine. Versus if you're a blue team person, your job is to keep people out. So that's where I was driving at, but like maybe that's not what you're saying.
Well, let's click on that for a second. So I was kind of saying, hey, well, here are types of risk, right? And so for each one of those types of risk, you can risk accept it, right? I think a key challenge, and I actually had a really interesting conversation with somebody yesterday, who's somebody you should talk to, but he goes and helps, let's just say, Fortune 100s rethink or refactor how they're managing risk. And what he's found is that it's very difficult to define um, like what risk is for the business. And so you might have 10 people that are involved somehow in, risk management and organization, and they all think something different. So you could have a sentence written in a piece of paper, and it's almost like developing and design requirements. Like, the agile process, the goal is to get very precise statement that can't be misinterpreted. Well, risk has the same issue where I say, hey, the risk is like somebody breaks in the front door. One person might think that means they stole a badge. Another person might means they take a hammer to the glass, right? And so like being able to actually calculate and present a risk perspective to the leaders and organizations so they can make better decisions is very difficult. That said, um, you're totally correct. Where we might say, hey, we found a risk. Well, we're going to put a compensating control in place. That might be transfer the liability to an insurance company. That might be we're going to add two-factor authentication. That might be we're going to just accept it, or maybe we're going to put something, like not to get into MITRE ATT&CK right now, but we might say, hey, well, if we can identify a piece of the MITRE ATT&CK path that we can actually, if we have a detection, we can prevent it earlier. Um, then that might be how we control it. So it's all about how do you actually. Well, I guess that what I'm trying to say is the hardest part of that whole process is actually finding a way to characterize the risk so that the people who have to make the decisions can make well-informed decisions that that maximize the ability for the company to stay
Cool.
operating.
All right. So it was during this process where you were the interim CISO that you first kind of explained a fundamental change in kind of the Microsoft security ecosystem to me that I thought was really eye opening. I don't think the
Yeah.
world is quite there yet, though it's probably coming there quickly. So why don't you explain what you think of the Microsoft security ecosystem today and how it works?
Okay, so one of the tasks that I was presented with was I had to go and stand up some security operations and reevaluate the endpoint detection response or EDR product that was in place at this company. And as I had been doing some work with Microsoft. It was my Azure Sentinel, and that's called Microsoft Sentinel. That's Microsoft's cloud SIM. And I'd been doing some work with that for some other projects adjacent with another product called Cribble. That's like I do a lot of work around like data pipeline engineering, and so I actually went out to the market, and I had two things to do. I had to identify an MSSP, and I had to identify um, not only a potential SIM depending on the MSSP, but also how are we gonna move our EDR situation forward? And so a couple things happened. So I'm actually going to give you I'm going to give you something you asked for and something you didn't ask for. So the first one is that, and this is my opinion, is that when I went out shopping for MSSPs, it quickly dawned on me that if I'm, depending on what I'm trying to solve for, a lot of MSSPs today, you go and you onboard an MSSP, and then there's no off ramp.
MSSP.
So without this
Explain
off ramp,
MSSP.
managed security service
Yeah.
provider. So this is where you outsource, let's say, the initial triage of your security alerts in your organization, to a third party, and they respond 24/7. They have file lists on operations, and they will throw over the fence alerts that are concerning or they determine that need to get escalated. And so there's really a couple ways that people call that today. So MSSP is one acronym, Managed Detection and Response, which is MDR, or Extended Detection and Response, which kind of adds the network component and some other value add. The acronyms in the market are confusing. Everyone kind of marks it slightly differently, but at the end of the day, it's the outsource of the level one operations of your stock, sometimes maybe level two also. Um, so back to what I realized was that if I intended on possibly having a stock in the future, or let's say I don't know how long I might want to be with a particular MSSP, one of the criteria I didn't have at the beginning was like, well, how do I get off of this MSSP? What does my security operations center look like when I go and get on board to their to their service offering? Sometimes they might bring their own case management system, their own set of tools that they work in. Um, but if I, let's say, don't renew my contract, um, I might just get turned off. And so a couple things happen. Is there switching costs? There is the ability for me to there's the ability for me to I'm sorry, not ability, but I now have to, let's say, onboard my next MSSP 6 months early and pay double for 6 months just to make a switch. So one of my criteria became, well, when I buy an MSSP, when I procure this offering, this security operations outsourcing, I want to be able to own the architecture when I'm done. And so that really changed the lens for me. Um, so anyways, now onto your question, which is I had some competency with Sentinel. I've worked with most of the SIMs out there, as you might guess, like with McAfee, IBM, um, Microsoft Sentinel, Devo. Like pretty much, if the SIM exists, I've at least touched it, if not implemented it many times. Um, we really liked Microsoft Sentinel because it was in the cloud, and we could do something that you couldn't do in most other SIMs, which was we could actually define detections as code. So we could use a declarative language to say, hey, this is the detection. We can put it in source control. We can push it up to the cloud. We can have change control, all that stuff with it. So then we decided we're going to do that. And we had, one EDR product, but we started looking at the Microsoft ecosystem. And so at the time, this business had a Microsoft E3 license. And if you've been following the EDR market, you have kind of like, like the top tier is kind of like CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, and 2 years ago, I wouldn't have said this, but today, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. It used to be called something different back then, but I'll just use current terms right now. Um, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, and really the whole Defender ecosystem, which we'll talk more in depth in a second, has really kind of come out of nowhere. I wouldn't say it's come out of nowhere because I'm sure Microsoft had a plan, but it's kind of shown up to the scene as like a top tier player. Um, but the thing that's super interesting, if I'm a CISO or if I'm if I have to go um, buy this stuff, is that Microsoft's built out this entire Defender ecosystem that is actually chipping away, I think, in a lot of cyber markets. So you have the EDR market, Defender for Endpoint. Um, Inside that product, there's also vulnerability management. So any endpoint that has the Defender agent also can do vulnerability scans. In addition, it can also report SaaS application usage. Um, that's just from like that one EXE and one license. That's I think it's about $8 a month per endpoint. Where something like CrowdStrike or SentinelOne, if you're on their top tier plan, it's way more than $8 a month. It's probably 13 to $20 a month. Um, and and so in addition, so let's hone in on this, like this security license that you can buy from Microsoft. So So yeah, if you have an E3 license, that's kind of like, that gets you like the Office applications. It gets you kind of like the probably what most people would think of is like the Microsoft suite for, productivity. Um, if you add on security, you get Defender for Endpoint, you get Cloud App Security, which is like, I wouldn't call it exactly CASB, but it's like encroaching on CASB. It's encroaching on Zero Trust with some of its capabilities. Um, we looked at a company not too long ago.
Define
Um,
CASB.
okay, so CASB's Cloud Access Security Broker is designed to help you kind of identify or be a central point of of administration for all the different, let's say, cloud products you might want to authenticate to and use as a business. Um, there's a lot of overlap between a lot of different kind of like identity and network access products and the zero trust type stuff today. So the market's kind of confused. But so if we look at the Microsoft E E5 environment, so I just kind of explained what the E3 is. It's the productivity stuff. You can add on security and you can add on like risk. So there's basically two pieces to the E5 license. You can buy the security or the risk separately, or you can combine them, and that's called an E5. And so on the E5 plus security or the E3 plus security side, you have Defender for Endpoint, you get Defender for Office 365, like the online stuff. So that's like things like malware scanning in OneDrive, SharePoint, all that kind of stuff. There's also phishing protection, so that's built into Office 365. So like that's going after like Proofpoint and Mimecast. You also have Defender for Cloud Apps, which is it can identify traffic and OAuth authentication into third-party SaaS applications. So, like, did a user go and give Salesforce access to your OneDrive? Did a user go and give some shady, website that has Microsoft authentication access to like all your email addresses, things like that. And then you also have, and then the final one is Defender for Cloud. So Microsoft uh, has the ability to not only monitor like VMs running in Azure, but also monitor like your AWS CloudTrail for operations in AWS, same thing with GCP. So this is all like, except for the cloud part, which is a separate add-on, that's all included for this license for $8 a month, which to me is crazy, right? So if I look at like, I just rattled off, I think, five different capabilities that most enterprises are paying 100 to 200K a year minimum. Like, if you're at least let's say a 1,500 seat organization, you're probably paying, at least $100,000 a year for each of those functionalities. And Microsoft saying, hey, we'll give it to you for $8 a month per user, which might be three to 400K for all that functionality. In addition, they also, like, any Microsoft integrated service is free to send logs into Sentinel. So it just gets crazier and crazier. And so the real thing though that is just amazing is that they've gamified the whole process of doing it right, doing it well, doing it right. So they have this thing called Secure Score on their dashboard. And if you're the traditional corporate AD on-prem, AD in the cloud environment, all those products that I just rattled off, and remember, we haven't even talked about risk yet and governance, but all those products I rattled off, like they have an entire set of instructions to like how to deploy your policy, how to reconfigure your cloud, how to do all the stuff. And it goes, and as you make these changes, your score goes up. As a new vulnerability shows up, it says, hey, well, you have more risk here because like Log4j is out and we found it on this machine, right? And so they've literally gamified the entire process of better securing your environment in one, I hate to say this, but in a single pane of glass. And it's just crazy. Like it's what it kind of fulfills the promise of like what a lot of folks have been promising on the sales and marketing side for a long time. In this one package is $8 a month. And so that's my the wow factor is that if I look out, like we're Litical's a VC firm, right? And as we go out to the market and we say, hey, well, what's novel today? A lot of what Microsoft's doing was novel 3 years ago. It was novel 5 years ago. But they've bought companies, they've built their own stuff and packaged it into a way that's actually consumable to somebody that's let's say below the security poverty line, who can't afford, 25 JPs to run a SOC or can't afford, doesn't have a $3 million labor budget in cyber. They've gamified it. They've made it really simple. They've made it cost effective to go in and actually do security pretty well. Um, and that's just on the surface. They have a lot of other stuff going on, just like in how they deliver those products. So like, Microsoft has telemetry to like every Windows machine on the planet. So they have their threat intel research group that pushes back into this product. So I could go on and on. And I think the craziest thing here is I'm a Linux guy, right? I'm not really a Microsoft fanboy, but like I can't ignore it. It's just like they've done such a great job at bundling all this stuff together. I think it makes if I were a lot of these other vendors, I'd be scared, right? I've talked to some vendors, and they're having a hard time selling against what Microsoft put together, and it's kind of nuts that it's turned out to be Microsoft that's been the one that's been able to put it together so well.
Yeah, I've heard from a couple CISOs that Microsoft is going to the CIOs of those organizations and saying, "Oh, well, we should upgrade to E5, and you can pay for the upgrade by getting rid of these four products, right?" And so the CISO is being handed this
Yep.
like, "Hey, I want E5, so please get rid of X, Y, and Z." I won't name names, but I think it's pretty interesting. So you've got an eye towards being a founder. Given this new landscape, what does excite you? What areas do you think, yeah, this is a great place to be playing right now, given that Microsoft is sucking the air out of the room over here?
Yeah, that's a I don't want I wish that was an easy question, right? So like I think that so there's still lots of opportunity in I'll give you a couple areas where at least that I'm interested in. So one of them is the whole idea of like I want to be able to type Terraform apply, and for those who aren't DevOps folks, like I want to be able to stand up a security operations center with like one command, right? I want to be able to have everything in my for my tenant configured and type Terraform apply, and it just goes. Meaning like I put in a few variables like customer name, EDR product, um, what plan they're on, and then just goes builds up the infrastructure for that. I think there's like one of Litical's companies, name of Charlie, is definitely going in that direction. They're starting to build the building blocks for that. Um, Same thing with detection engineering. So I mentioned before that like it's really I think it's really cool how Sentinel allows you to like write code to to declare detections where like most of the other SIMs today are all database configuration based, so you can't like push to GitHub and make a change there. I think that there's some companies that are out there that are starting to not only deliver the product functionality but deliver like detection engineering as a service. Um, I think that I think there's a lot of promise there, and then I think in as everybody knows, I'm a recovering SOAR founder. Product security actually is very interesting to me because it's a lot of the same integration challenges that we had in SOAR, but from a CI/CD perspective. So if you look at the DevSecOps figure eight, as you're building out your ability to get telemetry into the security team during the build process, like I'm a big believer that like I want the developer to get the security alert, not the security team right before release, right? So the more tooling we can have the earlier on, and so I think that there's a lot of start like nascent startups in the product security space. They're trying to provide ways to better glue together the DevSecOps pipeline, and then and that's kind of a product to me. That's a product security problem. I think there's one other area that is pretty interesting, which is if I'm a CISO and we know that GRC exists, and that's like identifies risk, but like I have lots of dashboards that give me alerts. So like I have my SIM, I have like my vuln scanner, I have alerts coming out of development or my software teams. I think there's an opportunity to kind of to attempt to do what SIM did for like alerts from like all these, on the network devices to boil all the alerts from like product security, from vulnerability management, from container builds, from cloud security configuration, to build that all into one like alert dashboard to help a CISO better understand where his real-time operational risk is. I think there's and I've seen a few. I'm aware of a few folks that are like starting to work on that problem. Um, One of the big challenges there is that there's nobody who has done a great job of building deduplication around findings with code scanning and things like that. Like there's let's say there's 75 code scanners and they all have different types of findings, but like if you put those in your pipeline, you can have 36 findings, but there's actually just one, right? And so the hard job of deduping, that's a challenge. Um, and then I feel like there's one more, but I can't think of it right
No
now.
worries. All right, so we're running up on time here, so I'm going to ask a couple last questions for you. So for first one, for people getting into infosec or new to information security, what resources would you point them to? What do you love?
Okay, so for me, um, I was always into computers. Like I didn't know I was a hacker until I had been a hacker for 10 years, right? Like like a hacker's like in my definition is somebody who wants to figure out how to get a system to work in a way it wasn't designed or intended, right? And so I took my Nintendo apart when I was like 9 years old because I wanted to know how it worked. Then I had to buy a new Nintendo because I couldn't put it back together. Um, so so like that's one way, right? Is to like to learn, right? I went through like the traditional academic route. I think that your mileage varies. Like there's kind of different qualities of schools and stuff out there, but like I needed a structured plan to execute on to be to get educated. But then once I escaped that or I graduated, um, for me, it's like really signing up for things that I don't know how to do yet and going and executing. Um, Going to conferences and just like not going to talks, but just like meeting people and talking to people, like got me really far. And then uh and then there's also like there's tons of online like CTFs and labs that people can do. And like I found that
ETF is
like
capture the flag.
they're not always the yeah, capture the flag. So like there's anything from like the global championship of hacking and the DEF CON CTF to like you can spend $99 to like play a CTF for a month. That's kind of like you're kind of guided along. OpenSOC, which is actually a it's an event at DEF CON and they do some online stuff, is a really good way to kind of get into at least the blue team side of it. And there's kind of like blue team and red team CTFs, meaning like defense and offense. Um, and so, that's what's worked for me, right? I've taken some SANS classes. I've kind of like done a little bit of everything, but for me, I like the applied side of things. So it's like I like to be able to like go kick the tires and try it out, and that's where like I consume and retain and learn the best.
You've mentioned blue team and red team a couple times. Can you define those for everyone?
Yeah, there's also purple team, right? So blue team is generally like the defenders. Red team is like the penetration testers or the folks that are trying to identify ways into the network that are unintended. And then you have what's called purple team, which is really when the red and blue team work together to, let's say, the red team will identify a path into the network. The blue team will then, let's say, remove that path, but also put detections in place to find out if someone's trying to get in it again. So that's kind of like how that works.
Cool. All right, so quick question, a rapid fire here. What's your favorite information medium? How do you like to learn? You kind of answered this actually before, but
Yeah, really hands-on
hands-on
labs,
labs.
right?
Yep. And
And reading the
what's your
docs.
favorite book?
What's my favorite book? Um, I would say Little Brother by Cory Doctorow.
That's a great one. Yeah, so that's so Cory Doctorow is a sci-fi writer who's been around for a while, but Little Brother is a it's actually kind of a tween book. It's aimed at tweens, but I read it too and I love it.
Hmm.
Kind of about being yeah, being a hacker, being against an oppressive system. Great choice.
So yeah, Cory Doctorow and I played Hacker Pyramid at DEF CON one year.
Oh, awesome.
I got to be in his team. It was awesome.
Uh, yeah, I found his lost phone at a O'Reilly event once, which is the only time I met him in person. I got to hand his phone back. Yeah. All right. So, any plugs you want to add at the end?
Well, yeah. So look, if you want to find me, like my website's bluecycle.net. We really do. We're like a boutique blue tea or security operations, maturity and advisory services company. We also do a lot of data pipeline work. So feel free to reach out. But I also love to just talk shop with people. I actually do a lot of mentoring work. So I'm happy to talk to anybody who's like trying to get into cyber, or somebody who's also like founders, right? I love kind of like helping founders, I guess get unstuck, right? Like I end up talking to a lot of people that like have an idea and either they're afraid to jump off the cliff or they're not sure if it's a good idea. So I like to help them figure out go to market or like can I actually build a business with this? So those are some of the things that folks can reach out to me from. And then you can find me on LinkedIn. If you like look up Political Ventures, you'll probably be able to find me.
Awesome. Well, JP, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. It was informative and excellent, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
All right.
Great to chat with you as always.